Vice President Harris has selected Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, the charming bulldog, as her choice for running mate in the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special live edition of Rebel HQ. If you're just waking up on the West Coast, the news broke about 45 minutes ago. The networks are already listening.
This is CNN Breaking News. This is an NBC News special report. This is an ABC News special report.
That's right. It is breaking news time across the broadcast and cable news media. What a big victory for a lot of progressives this morning. Tim Walz, 60 years old, the governor of Minnesota. He had been the progressive favorite in this vice presidential search that Kamala Harris had been conducting for the last 2 weeks. It came down to Walz and Josh Shapiro. The latest reporting suggests that this came down to simply Kamala Harris wanting to click with her running mate, and apparently Walz, with his earnestness, his politeness, his charm, that won over Kamala Harris. Josh Shapiro had everything going in his favor as well, and Harris reportedly likes him also, but there was something about Josh Shapiro's intensity compared to the earnestness and a little more laid-back style of Walz that apparently made the difference. Here's the latest reporting from the Washington Post, and let's put this up full screen. You can see Harris picks Tim Walz as VP ahead of multi-state tour. Vice President Harris has told allies that she has chosen Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate, opting for a former high school teacher and Midwestern Democrat to complete a newly assembled presidential ticket. According to 3 people familiar with this election who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss a decision that is not yet public. Walz is scheduled to appear with Harris in coming days in each of the 7 most competitive states: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. The news actually was first broken by CNN, which went on the air a short time ago with this.
Have one more major development. Vice President Kamala Harris, the presumptive Democratic nominee now for President of the United States, has selected Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate. A week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, maybe seen as a dark horse. Now he has emerged as the choice. Our MJ Lee, Jeff Zeleny, John King, Jamie Gangel, all reporting on this. MJ just saying maybe Walz, a vibes pick, seen as a Midwestern happy warrior. John King is here with us in New York, watching this unfold before our eyes. Let's just start, reset at the top of the hour, what Tim Walz means for this ticket now.
And by the way, John King, who's perhaps one of the finest political reporters in Washington and has been so for decades, he has long been known for breaking these kind of stories and having really deep political contacts, not just in the upper echelons of political power, but also among strategists, among ad makers. And there's a whole process that is underway right now, and that is the Harris campaign is going to be releasing a video very soon in which essentially she calls Tim Walz, and there'll be somebody recording Tim Walz as he picks up the phone and says, yes, hi, Madam Vice President. Yes, I'd like to be the running mate. Thank you, et cetera, as well as her side of the conversation. That then gets assembled and gets blasted out across social media. And then, of course, there's the rally at 7 o'clock tonight in Philadelphia. Well, the whole process involves a lot of different people and technical folks and production crews, and there's nobody who's better connected to all of this in Washington than John King. He has his essentially hands on the pulse of all these political operatives and strategists and people who put the process together. So when it comes from John King, you can take it to the bank. Let's keep watching what he said.
It means, number one, the Democrats have their ticket. They're about to go into their convention, and after Kamala Harris clinched the nomination with the most unorthodox nominating process of our lifetime, the President of the United States steps aside after winning the primaries. She wins a virtual voting among the delegates, and then she wants to make this decision. She wants all this cleaned up before they get to Chicago for the convention, so that can all be about prosecuting the case against Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and against the Republicans. So a very truncated process, a lot of pressure on the vice president. So as the voters out there get to judge, how she's handling this first big executive decision. So why Tim Walz? We're showing pictures of him right there in a jacket and a shirt with no tie on. Earlier we had pictures of him in a T-shirt. I do think the contrast here is going to be striking. This is a small-town Midwesterner. This is a man who won a Republican House seat and held it. In very difficult years for Democrats, he held on to it. So he has that small-town rural appeal, which is why did Donald Trump pick J.D. Vance? Sort of the same idea. Can you go into small communities and make the case? He's the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association. I can tell you his fellow Democratic governors love him, love him. They
Okay, so a couple of things there. Yes, he is beloved by the fellow governors. He's beloved by a lot of people that he served with for 12 years in Congress. And perhaps his biggest advocate, his biggest lobbyist for Kamala Harris was a former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Keep in mind that Pelosi got to know Tim Walz when he was a member of Congress for 12 years. She loved him as well. She was the one who was making the strongest case directly to Kamala Harris, saying, you got to go with Tim Walz. I've worked with this guy. He knows how to govern. He knows Washington. He knows how to get things done in Congress. He's got lots of friends on both sides of the aisle. So between that advocacy on behalf of Walz from folks like Nancy Pelosi and the fact that Walz had a final interview on Sunday, and apparently the chemistry was there between him and Kamala Harris, and that she saw him as the sort of the earnestness, the likability. Remember, it wasn't just for Kamala Harris. It wasn't just a political strategy, because by all accounts, the political analyst said that the one who checks the most boxes would have been Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. He's from a state where he's got a 61% approval rating. It's a state that is dead even. Shapiro has also served as governor. He's tenacious on crime. There's a certain, perhaps Shapiro may be the most convincing in terms of moving the Democrats a little bit back towards the center. And there are some concerns among Democrats that Kamala Harris, who's being painted right now by Republicans as the San Francisco liberal, there were some concerns that if she picked Walz, that would just reinforce that image. And therefore, the suggestion was, well, Josh Shapiro, not only because of how he might be able to carry Pennsylvania, which is crucial to the electoral map, but that Josh Shapiro would essentially soften some of the liberal edges and at least create this perception that Kamala Harris was moving back to the center. So that was the political calculus. But Harris had made it clear over the last couple of days, according to all the reporting, that she wanted somebody that she had a special relationship with, that apparently with President Biden. Harris and President Biden, when they started, there was somewhat of a sort of a frosty relationship, sort of a cold relationship. And Harris felt like she was cut out and that there was something of a personality clash, at least initially. So according to a number of people close to her, she wanted to not go down that route and have somebody that was just essentially for political expedience sake, who might help her with the electoral map, but she wanted somebody that she really liked, that she could trust, somebody that she felt is simpatico in terms of their connection. And by all accounts, Tim Walz has the charisma, the earnestness that you find in Midwesterners in spades. And one of the other things that apparently helped convince Kamala Harris to consider him over the last couple of weeks was simply that Walz became this lightning rod in terms of energizing progressives through his media appearances just in the last 2 weeks. I want to play for you the one that, according to people close to Harris, got Walz perhaps the most attention within the Harris inner circle. And this was an appearance that he made on MSNBC just a couple of weeks ago. And he was asked about J.D. Vance, who was the vice presidential nominee on the Republican side, Donald Trump's choice. And J.D. Vance was talking about how Democrats had essentially forgotten about rural Americans, about Americans who were not Americans who were in flyover country, was okay. Here's the response. Here's the response that came from J.D. Vance, from Tim Walz to J.D. Vance that caught a lot of people's attention. Watch. Sorry about the tech issues.
On America. My town had 400 people in it, 24 kids in my graduating class, 12 were cousins, and he gets it all wrong. It's not about hate. It's not about collapsing in. The golden rule there is mind your own damn business. Their policies are what destroyed rural America. They've divided us. They're in our exam rooms. They're telling us what books to read. And I think what Kamala Harris knows is bringing people together around the shared values, strong public schools, strong labor unions that create the middle class, health care that's affordable and accessible. Those are the things. You look what they're talking about. They went right to division. They did not give us a plan on health care. Donald Trump talked about infrastructure. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris built bridges, built roads. So I think this is going back to the bread and butter, getting away from this division. We do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary. and I think bringing back people together, well, it's true. These guys are just weird. And it's, you know, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something. That's
okay, right there. They're running for He-Man Women Haters Club. They are weird. The Harris campaign, according to people who were watching this, loved it. And while Harris and some of her top aides didn't see it in real time on MSNBC, they saw the clip and they saw how the clip went viral. And that's essentially what got Walz ahead from the final 10 to maybe the final 4 or 5, is that it became very clear to the Harris campaign that this guy was great. He was a sort of a bulldog. He's earnest. He stands for progressive values in a way that he's willing to defend, and he's willing to defend them and argue them to Republicans and make the case to Midwestern style voters who appreciate sort of the earnestness and the direct sort of speaking blunt style. So that's what got Walz essentially to the final 4 or 5. And then, and by the way, the Harris campaign picked up Walz's theme of weird and decided, maybe that's a more effective attack line on the Republicans than Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And Joe Biden's claims about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy hadn't really registered with a lot of moderate and independent voters. And of course, for Democrats who are aware of January the 6th and have that fresh in their memory, sure, that was a great argument. But the polling suggested that that line of attack against Donald Trump wasn't registering that well. So the Harris campaign decides, okay, let's pivot. Let's go with the ridicule, kind of like what Donald Trump does to Democrats and to his rivals. Let's go with the ridicule and let's follow Tim Walz's lead and start calling Donald Trump and J.D. Vance weird. And by the way, it has the added benefit of people can tune into a Trump rally where he talks about Hannibal Lecter having to choose between electrocution or death by sharks. And people will realize that, yeah, weird is appropriate. And maybe that starts to put a couple chinks in the Trump armor. And it has worked. So a lot of people credit J.D. Vance with both the ridicule, but also J.D. Vance's sort of media magnetism, again, with getting him to sort of the final stages. And then it was a matter of who is the most likable, who is the person that Kamala Harris feels that she can click with the easiest. I want to get to some of your comments because then I appreciate, first of all, you hanging with me. One lesson here for anybody who's going to go live on your home sort of studios or your home StreamYard is don't hit your microphone because it's very sensitive and it can knock it out. That's what I did a couple of minutes ago, so we lost audio. Sorry about that. J.D. Vance is weird, says Roos Guys. I hear you. J.D. Vance is kind of weird. Tim Walz is my governor. Minnesota, what a Minnesota rouser, as the fight song goes. I mean, Minnesota has not gone Republican since 1972. So there's not necessarily an electoral map advantage in having the governor of Minnesota. Minnesota is a state that should go to the Democrats regardless who Kamala Harris picked as her running mate. So this is clearly not about electoral map. Pennsylvania, perhaps maybe more crucial, but the betting from people who are familiar with the decision from Kamala Harris is that Tim Walz is going to appeal not only to voters in Minnesota or his home state, but also to Wisconsin, which is a battleground state, and Michigan and Pennsylvania. That his style, his blunt speaking style, his approach, his earnestness, the guy that you would meet at a hardware store who would tell you what kind of plugs you need for your radiator, that's Tim Walz, and that has great appeal, Democrats believe, to the kind of voters that they're going to need to win in order to win the November election. And then you add in, of course, that this is sort of the path of least resistance is the way it's been described. And what I mean by that is a number of progressives over the last week have been advocating for Tim Walz, suggesting that Josh Shapiro has said some things about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that would cause problems, specifically when Josh Shapiro likened the student protesters protesting Israel's war in Gaza to the KKK. Now, Shapiro wasn't making the argument in terms of the morality of their views. He was just talking about in free speech terms. If you're not allowing the KKK on universities, why are you allowing the hate speech that is coming from some of these Palestinian demonstrators? But it was sort of an inartful way that he said it, and it generated huge controversy among the left who were skeptical of Josh Shapiro. The irony is that Tim Walz has taken the exact same position on Israel and Gaza as Josh Shapiro, although Tim Walz hasn't said what Shapiro said about the protesters. Tim Walz has also criticized Netanyahu, but has also praised the Israeli government. Tim Walz has talked about a two-state solution. Tim Walz has talked about support for Israel for years. He has voted for sending weapons to Israel. So progressives are going to be a little bit surprised that Tim Walz, his position on Gaza and Israel is not actually that different from Josh Shapiro. But the perception was that Josh Shapiro is much more of a neocon, a hawk. And so the Harris campaign thought, okay, well, let's go with the path of least resistance. Let's not stir up anger from the left. The left clearly wants Tim Walz. There's a little bit of baggage with Josh Shapiro that could exist politically. And at a time when younger voters, particularly those online, are so enthralled with Tim Walz, and the Twitterverse loves this guy. The Harris campaign, I'm sure part of the thinking was, let's not rock the boat here. We've got younger voters and people who are energized again with Kamala Harris. Let's not throw a wrench into things by picking a guy that there's some questions about. And then, oh, by the way, the fact that Harris apparently had felt a better connection with Tim Walz than with Josh Shapiro, and that essentially made the ultimate decision. Let's get to more of your questions and comments, and we'll try to answer them here. Chris, Walz, I'm not sure what that means. Chris Collins, but I spelled waltz right. It's waltz. W-A. Am I saying Walz? Waltz, W-A-L-Z. My apologies if that's on me. Democrats have now become the favorites to the White House, says Payton Enthusiast. Look, I think they were favorites regardless of whether it was Tim Walz or whether it was Josh Shapiro. I think the Democrats were on a track. And look, the polling has showed, I mean, Kamala Harris, she has doubled her polling numbers twice. And what I mean is, when she started, before President Biden announced he was withdrawing from the race, when there were head-to-head polling that was done between Harris, and by the way, we can leave Tim Walz up there. When there was head-to-head polling between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, Donald Trump was up by 2 or 3 points, and he was up in most of the battleground states. Within days of Kamala Harris essentially being the presumptive nominee, with Joe Biden withdrawing and Kamala Harris being the presumptive nominee, suddenly the polls showed that it was even. And then after a week, the poll showed that Harris was up 2. And now we're talking about 2.5, 3 weeks since Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee. She is now up nationally, according to polls, by 4 and 5 points. And she's leading 6 of the 7 battleground states. Now, most of those leads in the battleground states are within the polls margin of errors. And so we're talking about, 49-48, where the polls margin of error is +2 or +3. So we're talking 49-48 for Harris. It could be, if the polls margin of error is 2, it could be a 51-46, or it could be the other direction. It could be Harris is down by 1. So there's all sorts of different ways to look at this. The bottom line is that the polls in most of the battleground states are even, although it's trending towards Harris. And nationally, Harris has continued this sort of glide path where her lead over Donald Trump is getting bigger. So to the argument how Democrats have become the favorites to the White House, I don't think the Walz decision makes any difference. I think Harris was on the path anyway, whether it was Josh Shapiro or Tim Walz, even if it was Mark Kelly, who a lot of people suggested was a boring senator from Arizona and wouldn't do anything in terms of the responsibilities of a vice presidential running mate to be the pit bull or the attack dogs. But even with Kelly, I think Democrats were in pretty good shape. But look, I think you're right. I think Democrats are the favorites, and the latest polling and betting odds suggest that most people expect this election is going to go to Kamala Harris. Veep, he is 60. I want to read to you a couple other things about Timothy James Walz. Not only is he 60 years old, born April 6, 1964, he's a former U.S. Army non-commissioned officer, served in the National Guard, retired educator. He was born in West Point, Nebraska. He joined the Army National Guard and worked in agriculture, manufacturing, and teaching after high school. He graduated from Children State College in Nebraska before moving to Minnesota in 1996. Before running for Congress, he worked as a social studies teacher in the Mankato School District, where he taught geography. He was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives for Minnesota's 1st Congressional District in 2006, defeating 6-term Republican incumbent Gil Gutnicht. Walz was reelected 5 times, retiring in 2019 after being elected governor of Minnesota. As governor of Minnesota, he has had a string of policy successes. He has codified Roe versus Wade, abortion rights. He has had a string of victories with unions. He's been able to increase funding for school lunch programs and education. He has been able to pass legislation that implemented new common sense gun control, gun reforms in Minnesota, even though he previously had a terrific record with the NRA. But at a certain point, Walz pivoted and said, you know what, I made a mistake. I should not have taken all that money from the NRA. And so he donated the money to various causes. And there I go, hitting the microphone again. He donated the money to various causes. And so, he's now in the position of, David Hogg, another one of his fierce advocates. David Hogg, the survivor of the Parkland shooting, has become also another one of the social media types who has been a huge advocate for Governor Tim Walz. And again, David Hogg, a survivor of the Parkland shooting, and Tim Walz just 12 years ago was a darling of the NRA, but he has had a change. I want to play for you some of the other clips that are out there, and so you can get a sense about sort of Tim Walz. And here we go. Let me put this in full. This is Wu-Tang is for the children, what he posted on social media. Let's play this.
Speaking it into existence, Governor Walz for vice president.
These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away. They want to be in your exam room. I've got a 23-year-old who told me TikTok is on fire. Go ahead and continue to denigrate people. Go ahead. My God, they went after cat people. Good luck with that. Turn on the internet and see what cat people do when you go after them.
Don't fuck with cats.
It'd be funny if it wasn't so sad. They see the least fortunate among us as scapegoats and punchlines for them. Kamala Harris and
all right, we got music there, so we got to move on. We can't use that because of copyright issues. Here's another one. JD Vance. Tim Walz is who JD Vance wants you to think JD Vance is. Let's play this. This is a good one.
Hey, everybody. Tim here. 11 days till the election, but it's my pro tip of the day out on the road. I got to show you this. This right here is the headlight harness on a 2014 Ford Edge. Ford, this is unacceptable. It burned out hot on the connector. So for $7.99 at Napa Auto Parts here in the city, you can replace this. Just clip off the back, use some shrink wrap connectors on there, tape it back together and put it back in. It's about a 5-minute fix and you're back on the road safe and sound. So pro tip of the day. Second one is get out and vote for One Minnesota. Get out and let's take this state in a direction we know it needs to go. Go vote. Hey, everybody. Tim here. 11 days till the election, but it's my pro tip of the day out on the road. I got to show you this.
All right, here's another one I like. Well, this is Joe. I just fell in love with Tim Walz. Let me play this for you.
Speaking it into existence, Governor Walz for vice
president. That already.
Want to take books away. They want to be in your exam room.
It is now.
Ow! My eyes! And my legs hurt too.
This is the moment that Governor Tim Walz signed a law guaranteeing all students receive a free breakfast and lunch no matter their household income. That was another one of his progressive successes in Minnesota, and a lot of people have posted this one on Twitter as well. Again, if you're just joining us, Tim Walz is the choice by Vice President Kamala Harris as her running mate for the 2024 presidential election. There was some reporting even from CNN that when the story first came out this morning that, I'll put myself full for this, that Harris had not officially called Tim Walz yet, that she had told a couple of her associates, I'm going with Tim Walz, and they had started the whole sort of process that's underway to try to set up the phone call, but that Tim Walz heard of this essentially first from the media, from CNN. Presumably by now he has gotten the official phone call in which he and Vice President Kamala Harris have recorded their ends of it, and that'll be a video that you'll see later today. But that's, sometimes how this goes. There's so much excitement, and there's so many people who have to be part of the process that it's literally impossible for a campaign to sort of hide this until the very moment when they announce the selection themselves. Usually they make the phone call, and then whoever's the running mate tells their family and friends, and then word gets out pretty quickly. In this particular case, it came from people who were close to Kamala Harris, who were close to the selection process, who said, yeah, she has chosen Tim Walz. CNN went up with the story about 9 o'clock this morning, and presumably by now, and we're now talking about 10:30, Tim Walz has gotten the official phone call. And hopefully Josh Shapiro and Mark Kelly have also gotten phone calls saying, thank you for your participation in this process. And it's not an easy process, especially in 2 weeks where we have to submit tens of thousands of documents and emails and records and questionnaires and all that sort of thing. It's not an easy process, but hopefully Kamala Harris, and I'm sure she has, and that she's reached out to the other people and said, to Josh Shapiro, I still need Pennsylvania. I'm going to be counting on you to help me win Pennsylvania. And same with Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona. I'm sure Harris is telling Mark Kelly, Arizona is a swing state, as you know. I need to learn from you in terms of what I can say, what messaging can I craft, what types of ads do I need to run in Arizona to be able to pull off a victory in Arizona like you've had. So these are still crucial figures for her campaign. And part of I think the delicate sort of nature of the selection process now is, yes, while Kamala Harris has picked Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, as her running mate, she still needs to maintain the relationship with Shapiro and Kelly and others, because she's going to need them for the fall election in terms of the electoral votes in Arizona and Pennsylvania and beyond. Also, there was some discussion about, okay, how come Pete Buttigieg didn't make it to the final round? Electorally, Pete Buttigieg from Indiana, obviously Indiana's gone Republican, expected to go Republican, so there's some concerns about whether that would help. It wouldn't really help Pete Buttigieg electorally, although a lot of people said he had the politics chops, perhaps better than anybody. Also, having served in the administration, the Biden administration as Secretary of Transportation, he knows how the government works. But that might have also been something of a hindrance, because Harris and Buttigieg, at least according to some of the reporting, they weren't the closest of friends, even though they both sat in together on cabinet meetings and had events together. So it's possible that Harris either felt something about the relationship with Buttigieg, or felt like, you know what, maybe his time is better served as a Secretary of State or another position. And maybe she also felt that having an African-American woman at the top of the ticket and a gay man as the running mate might have been too much. I think it would have been great, and I think America's ready for it. But for whatever reason, Kamala Harris didn't essentially click with Pete Buttigieg in a way that might have vaulted him into the final sort of consideration. He was among the final five, and apparently there was another phone call between Harris and Pete Buttigieg over the weekend. But the in-person meetings on Sunday were Mark Kelly from Arizona, Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, Tim Walz from Minnesota, and something about the interview that Walz had with Kamala Harris, and that cinched it for him. I donated to Bernie, of course, says Luann. More of your comments. Pete would be awesome as Secretary of State. I hear you. I think he'd be great. There's so much excitement. I'm psyched. I can't believe we got the VP we wanted so much. One for the progressives, and I'm so happy she had the great sense to choose a guy who's done so much for Minnesota. I hear you on Minnesota. I think there's actually an argument that the progressive, and Cenk Uygur, my colleague at TYT, made this argument on Newsweek in a must-read article. I think there's an argument that Josh Shapiro was also as much of a progressive choice as Tim Walz, because Josh Shapiro has a record of taking on Wall Street, taking on the big money donations and lobbyists. And that's a key plank and something that a lot of progressives have been wanting. So, and Cenk also made the point that, you know, Josh Shapiro, despite the way he had been sort of caricatured as, you know, a neocon who marches in lockstep with Israel, that actually wasn't the case, and that Josh Shapiro's position on Israel is no different from most of the other Democrats. So must read article about Josh Shapiro. And I think, you know, progressives might have been pleasantly surprised if it had been Josh Shapiro and they had some time to really take a look at Josh Shapiro's everything that he has said. But that's sort of water under the bridge at this point, because Tim Walz is the choice. Let's go to a couple more questions and then we'll end this. Pete is great too, says Kieran O'Connor. I hear you. Liked. Shapiro will probably be in her cabinet. Hopefully Bernie is in there as labor secretary. There's room for everyone. Angela, may all Dems united and go forward. We are not going back. Kind and sober man he is. Dems unite. And you hear that. You're going to hear that a lot today. And I think you're going to see a number of steps that will be taken by the Harris campaign to certainly unite. And look, she's a lot of times this pick happens right before the Democratic convention. The Democratic convention is in 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks. So she's got a little bit of time for this rollout in several states with Tim Walz, where they'll go to starting in Philadelphia tonight and then going on to Ohio and Wisconsin and Michigan and other states. There's plenty of time for the Harris campaign to sort of focus on Tim Walz, to unite the Democratic Party and have all this sort of cleaned up, or at least in the shape that she wants it, starting at the Democratic convention, which, oh, by the way, on night one, we've already learned, President Biden is going to be the main speaker on night one. So there'll essentially be a thank you to President Biden, where they'll highlight the successes of the Biden-Harris administration and the economy and the 16 million jobs that have been created and the record numbers on Wall Street, despite the 3% drop yesterday, which, oh, by the way, is nothing like the 10% drop that Donald Trump had during his administration 5 different days. Anyway, there'll be plenty of time to make this argument for the Harris campaign and to sort of lay out the successes, and then have the Democratic all-stars, whether it's, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and maybe Michelle Obama and others that will also speak at the convention. And then the third night will belong to Tim Walz, and perhaps you'll hear at the convention as well from Pete Buttigieg and Josh Shapiro and Mark Kelly and Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders at the convention. That's awesome stuff. And then the final night will be the formal acceptance speech by Vice President Kamala Harris, who will be the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. And that'll be the fourth night of the convention. So there's a lot ahead. I want to thank everybody who has been watching with us so far. Again, the breaking news happened about an hour and a half ago. I'm sure there's going to be more throughout the day. There'll be this video that the Harris campaign is going to release. We'll talk about that on TYT, our main show at 6 o'clock Eastern time, 3 o'clock Pacific. By the way, we'll also have coverage of the Harris Walz event, the rally tonight in Philadelphia when he is officially unveiled. There'll be quite the sort of energy there. We've seen that Tim Walz is great on TV. He can also be something of a barn burner when it comes to his campaign rallies and speeches. And so we'll see that starting tonight. But I want to thank everybody for watching us this morning on Rebel HQ. Thanks to everybody up and down the line who's been helping us with this broadcast. And again, my apologies about the shaking the microphone here. Never shake your microphone. That's the way to knock out the audio. Anyway, we'll see you later today on Rebel HQ and tonight on TYT. Again, Tim Walz is Kamala Harris's pick for running mate in 2024, the Minnesota governor, a victory for progressives. He's had a string of progressive successes in Minnesota. He now will seek to replicate that in a possible Harris-Walz administration. The election is 90 days away, 90 days until the November 5th election. Make sure you're all registered to vote. 3 months, folks. This is going to be an intense final ride, final race to the finish. I'm David Schuster. Thanks for watching. We'll see you later.